Hello, and thank you for tuning in to this week's episode of Bite-Sized Cybercrime, the podcast where we discuss cybercrimes and cybersecurity news. This week we will be discussing a ransomware group called Qilin, that's spelled Qilin, and some new techniques that they're using to make ransomware an even bigger threat than it already is. Ransomware is a type of malware that encrypts devices or systems, meaning it locks down the data on them, making it inaccessible to anyone except for those ransomware actors who have the key. The threat actors then extort the organization, demanding a payment in exchange for a key to decrypt their data. Some ransomware organizations also steal data and use that as further leverage to pressure organizations into paying. Qilin has started using a new tactic in the data stealing part of that can also lead to future attacks. That is, stealing account credentials right from the web browser. In an observed attack, Qilin gained access to a network using compromised credentials for a VPN, or virtual private network. VPNs that don't require multi-factor authentication can prove to be an easy foothold directly into a network. Unfortunately for the victims, this VPN did not require multi-factor authentication. After gaining access, they typically lay dormant, just poking around and becoming familiar with the network, seeing what assets are critical, what's frequently accessed, what typical activity looks like so that they can hide amongst it. After this, they managed to compromise a domain controller and modify a group policy object. Group policy is a feature in Windows that allows you to centrally manage and configure certain policies in computers, applications, and user accounts. Group policies can be used for things like applying password requirements or blocking access to certain things. A set of these configurations is called a group policy object, which can then be applied to specific users, computers, or groups of users and computers. An attacker being able to discreetly group policy won't raise many red flags, since it's a native Windows tool and administrators use it. And that's exactly what Qilin did. They edited a group policy object to execute a PowerShell script. PowerShell is a scripting language native to Windows that allows you to interact with the operating system. It's typically used for automating tasks, but you can also do anything in PowerShell that you could do just using the standard graphical user interface. This is also a native Windows tool that is commonly used by administrators, so typically this wouldn't raise any red flags either. This script was executed by a batch script that is run every time a user logs in. These aren't very unusual and are typically used to do things like map network drives and update group policy. But this also meant that now this malicious PowerShell script would run every single time someone logged in. And that PowerShell script would collect credentials stored in Google Chrome. It would save those credentials inconspicuously in a temporary log folder and then send them over to the attackers. Now, I like password managers, and I believe they are a secure way to generate and use complex passwords, but I really don't recommend ones built right into the browser for this reason. The information can be accessed easier than you think, and most of the times it's not locked behind any kind of password. Other password managers like Bitwarden, KeePass, and 1Password encrypt your passwords with a master password that you create. So as long as your master password is strong, those credentials would be safe from this type of attack. The attacker simply wouldn't be able to access them at all. Gathering Chrome credentials makes things really tricky, as now you'd have to reset every single password that you saved to the Chrome web browser. And that can be a lot of passwords at once. In fact, I just checked my password manager and I have 224 passwords saved in there. Although admittedly, some of those are duplicates. It's basically the same login credentials for the same website, but it was a slightly different form and it saved differently. So, unsure how many actual unique passwords are in there, but that would be quite the time crunch to change all of those. Now, consider this is a group policy applied to all machines across the company. That is potentially hundreds and thousands of individual employees who now need to change all of their passwords. These passwords will also likely be used in future password attacks, especially when you consider the high rate of people reusing passwords across different platforms. It's okay to admit you do it. even if it's technically not the best security practice, and I would recommend trying to add at least one unique thing to a password for an individual website. Attacks are moving more in a direction of living off the land techniques, which is using native Windows tools, rather than building custom malware. And don't get me wrong, malware is still very much prevalent, and it's not going to be going away anytime soon, especially when you consider ransomware. A lot of these living off the land techniques are going to be upon the initial entry point and the staging to set up something like a ransomware attack. Using native Windows tools is going to be a lot more inconspicuous than using some custom malware, when really you can achieve the same results with both of them. So, if this is so hard to detect, what exactly can you do about this type of attack? In this case, having multi-factor authentication enabled on the VPN would have likely prevented this completely. Beyond that, being able to compromise a domain controller and edit root policy was likely due to some privileges the attacker was able to take advantage of that probably should not have been there. It's important to apply privileges to users and groups that aren't unnecessarily broad, because it leaves a lot of options open for privilege escalation attacks. This includes strong passwords on all local administrator accounts. You should also be restricting certain PowerShell modules so that they can only be used by users that you want to be using those modules. This would limit the capability of the attackers to exploit native tools like PowerShell, and of course group policy as well. That should also only be limited to administrators. Providing an actual password management solution to users instead of them just using Chrome also likely would have reduced the impact of this particular attack. There's also a benefit in investing in behavior-based antivirus or endpoint detection and response software. Software that doesn't just look for malware signatures, but also looks for odd behavior, such as passwords being removed from Chrome and copied into this weird folder, or data leaving the network in unusual amounts. Thank you to Bleeping Computer, The Hacker News, Security Weekly, and Tech Radar for information on Qilin and their techniques. It's always really helpful to learn about the methods attackers are using so that we can better prevent different cyber attacks from occurring in our environments. And of course, thank you for tuning into this week's episode of Bite-Sized Cybercrime, and until next time, stay secure.